think this is just about one city? Think again. Wichita, Kansas. A city known for quiet neighborhoods and hardworking families. But beneath the surface, a silent emergency is unfolding. Homelessness is rising, fentanyl is spreading, and the streets are becoming places of survival, not safety. This isn't just a crisis, it's a wake-up call. Welcome to Globe Path Travel Documentary, where we don't just explore places, we uncover the truths buried beneath them. Today's journey takes us to Wichita, Kansas. But this isn't a travel guide, it's a reality check. Forget the postcard image. Wichita is facing a crisis that's spreading quietly through its streets. Homelessness fueled by poverty, broken systems, and a drug so deadly it's changing lives in seconds. Fentanyl. If you think this doesn't affect you, think again. What's happening here is happening everywhere. And if you skip this video, you'll miss the facts that mainstream headlines won't show you. So before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe to Globe Path, and stay with us, because understanding this crisis is the first step toward fixing it. Current state of homelessness in Wichita, Kansas, often seen as a quiet Midwestern city, is now facing a crisis that's anything but quiet. Beneath the surface of its suburban calm lies a growing emergency. Hundreds of residents without homes, shelter systems stretched to their limits, and a deadly drug silently tightening its grip on the streets. The numbers are alarming, but the reality behind them is even more devastating. As of the most recent count, Wichita has over 690 homeless individuals, and nearly 200 of them are unsheltered. That means hundreds of people are living in tents pitched behind buildings, sleeping in cars parked under bridges, or surviving in alleyways with no roof, no heat, and no protection. These aren't just statistics, they're people. Some are elderly, some are teenagers. Many are families who lost everything after a job layoff, a medical emergency, or a domestic crisis. And once they fall through the cracks, climbing back out becomes nearly impossible. Emergency shelters in Wichita are overwhelmed. Facilities like the Union Rescue Mission and Humankind Ministries are operating at full capacity, often forced to turn people away simply because there's no space left. On cold nights, dozens are left outside. On rainy days, they huddle under tarps or bus stops. The city's resources are stretched thin, and the demand for shelter far exceeds what's available. Volunteers and outreach workers describe heartbreaking scenes: mothers with children sleeping in cars, veterans curled up on sidewalks, and individuals with severe mental health issues wandering without support. But homelessness in Wichita isn't just about lacking shelter. It's increasingly tied to a more sinister threat: fentanyl. This synthetic opioid, cheap and dangerously potent, has infiltrated the city's streets with devastating consequences. Among the homeless population, fentanyl overdoses have tripled in the past 2 years. It's not just a drug, it's a survival mechanism for many. People use it to escape the cold, the hunger, the trauma, but the escape is temporary and often fatal. First responders in Wichita now carry Narcan, a life-saving medication that reverses opioid overdoses, as standard gear. It's no longer reserved for known addicts. EMTs and police officers administer it to anyone found unconscious in public spaces, especially near encampments. The frequency of these interventions has become so high that Narcan is now considered as essential as oxygen masks or defibrillators. And in some cases, responders have revived the same individual multiple times in a single week. The tragedy is compounded by how invisible this crisis remains to the general public. Many residents of Wichita drive past encampments without noticing. They walk by homeless individuals without making eye contact. The city's homeless are often treated as a nuisance, not a symptom of deeper systemic failure. But behind every tent is a story. Behind every overdose is a life that once had dreams, relationships, and potential. Consider this: the person sleeping under a bridge tonight might be someone's father who lost his job after a factory closed. The woman curled up in a car might be a domestic violence survivor who fled her abuser with nowhere to go. The teenager panhandling downtown might have aged out of foster care with no support system. These are not criminals, they are not lazy, they are human beings caught in a cycle that's nearly impossible to break without intervention. Wichita's homeless crisis is not unique, but it is urgent. The city is now at a tipping point. Without immediate action, the numbers will rise, the shelters will collapse under pressure, and fentanyl will continue to claim lives in silence. This segment of the documentary aims to shine a light on what's happening right now. Not to shock for the sake of views, but to educate, to provoke empathy, and to inspire change. Because if we don't talk about it, we can't fix it. And if we don't see these people, we'll never understand how close any of us could be to becoming one of them. Root causes of homelessness. Homelessness isn't just about losing a home. It's about losing stability, safety, and the systems that are supposed to catch us when we fall. In Wichita, Kansas, the crisis on the streets is growing not because people suddenly stop trying, but because the odds stacked against them have become nearly impossible to overcome. To understand the scale of this emergency, we have to look deeper at the root causes that push people out of homes and into survival mode. The first and most pressing issue is affordable housing, or the lack of it. Over the past few years, rent in Wichita has increased by 28%, while wages have barely moved. For low-income workers, this means that even a full-time job isn't enough to cover basic living costs. And for those working part-time or gig jobs, the situation is even worse. Many homeless individuals are employed. They clean buildings, deliver food, or work temporary shifts. But they still can't afford the upfront costs of renting. Security deposits, application fees, and credit checks become insurmountable barriers. Housing is no longer a right. It's a privilege reserved for those who can navigate a system built on paperwork and financial history. Then there's the silent crisis of domestic violence. Survivors, mostly women, but also men and children, often flee abusive homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They leave behind jobs, belongings, and support networks. And when they reach safety, they find themselves alone, broke, and without shelter. Many end up in emergency rooms, police stations, or temporary shelters. But those options are limited, and the trauma they carry makes it even harder to rebuild. For these individuals, homelessness isn't a choice. It's the cost of survival. Layered on top of these struggles is the growing presence of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that's cheap, powerful, and deadly. On the streets of Wichita, fentanyl isn't used to party. It's used to numb pain, physical pain, emotional pain, the pain of being invisible. For many homeless individuals, fentanyl becomes a way to escape the cold, the hunger, and the hopelessness. But the escape is temporary, and the consequences are often fatal. Overdoses are rising, lives are being lost, and the drug's grip is tightening. It's important to understand that addiction is often the result, not the cause, of homelessness. People don't end up on the streets because they're addicted. They become addicted because they're on the streets. Trauma, isolation, and despair create the perfect storm for substance use. When someone has no home, no family, and no future, the temptation to disappear, even for a few hours, can be overwhelming. And once addiction sets in, it becomes even harder to access housing, employment, or healthcare. These root causes are interconnected. Housing insecurity leads to job instability. Domestic violence leads to trauma. Trauma leads to addiction, and addiction leads to deeper isolation. It's a cycle that feeds itself, and without intervention, it becomes nearly impossible to break. In Wichita, this cycle is playing out in real time. Every tent, every alley, every overdose is a symptom of a system that's failing to address the real reasons people become homeless. And until we confront those reasons, until we invest in affordable housing, support survivors, and treat addiction as a health issue, we'll continue to see this crisis grow. This segment isn't about blame, it's about understanding. Because when we understand the root causes, we stop asking, why don't they just get a job, and start asking, why is the system making it so hard to survive? Why isn't help reaching them? System failures. In Wichita, the crisis of homelessness isn't just about people living without shelter. It's about a system that's failing to catch them before they fall. The very institutions designed to offer support, mental health services, welfare programs, public infrastructure, are either overwhelmed, inaccessible, or unintentionally pushing people deeper into despair. Let's start with mental health. For many individuals experiencing homelessness, mental illness isn't a side issue, it's central to their struggle. Depression, PTSD, schizophrenia, and substance use disorders are common, yet Wichita's mental health services are severely underfunded and stretched beyond capacity. Clinics have long wait lists, crisis centers are understaffed, and outreach teams often lack the resources to follow up with those in need. The result? People in psychological distress are left untreated, wandering the streets, vulnerable to exploitation, overdose, or incarceration. Welfare programs, too, are riddled with barriers. One of the most ironic and heartbreaking requirements is proof of address. To receive housing assistance, food stamps, or even basic identification, applicants must provide documentation that proves where they live. But for someone sleeping in a tent or a car, that's impossible. This bureaucratic catch-22 locks out the very people these programs were designed to help. Without an address, they can't get benefits. Without benefits, they can't get an address. It's a cycle that traps people in poverty and keeps them invisible to the system. Even basic public infrastructure has become hostile to the homeless. Public restrooms are often locked or removed entirely, leaving people with nowhere to go for hygiene or dignity. This leads to health issues, public complaints, and further criminalization. Meanwhile, food banks are stretched thin, facing rising demand and dwindling donations. Volunteers report running out of supplies before the line ends. Families go hungry, seniors skip meals, and those with dietary restrictions have no options at all. Perhaps most disturbing is how homelessness is increasingly treated as a crime. In Wichita, individuals are being ticketed or arrested simply for sleeping in public spaces. Whether it's a park bench, a sidewalk, or a patch of grass behind a building, the act of resting without shelter is penalized. These citations don't solve the problem, they escalate it. A ticket becomes a fine becomes a warrant. And soon someone who needed help is sitting in jail, further traumatized and stigmatized. This criminalization doesn't just affect individuals, it affects the entire community. It diverts police resources, clogs court systems, and creates a culture of fear and shame around poverty. Instead of compassion, there's punishment. Instead of support, there's silence. The truth is, the system meant to protect vulnerable citizens is now pushing them further into crisis. It's not just failing, it's actively contributing to the problem. And while some officials acknowledge these gaps, meaningful reform remains slow, fragmented, and underfunded. In this segment, we're not just exposing flaws, we're asking hard questions. Why are mental health services treated as optional when they're essential? Why are welfare programs built around paperwork instead of people? Why are public spaces being closed off instead of opened up? And why are we punishing people for surviving in the only way they know how? Because until we confront these failures head-on, homelessness will continue to grow, not just in Wichita, but across the country. And the people most in need will remain unheard, unseen, and unhelped. What is the government doing? Local Efforts, 2025 Update. In 2025, Wichita's government is still grappling with the scale and complexity of its homelessness crisis. While some progress has been made, the pace of change remains slow, and the gap between policy and impact is still painfully wide. The city's homelessness task force, now in its third year, continues to operate under a 5-point strategy designed to address the crisis holistically. Housing First remains the foundation of Wichita's approach. This model prioritizes placing individuals into permanent housing without requiring sobriety or employment first. Since 2023, over 300 transitional housing units have been added, many through partnerships with nonprofit developers. However, the waiting lists are long, and demand continues to outstrip supply. Emergency shelter expansion has seen modest growth. Temporary shelters have increased their capacity by roughly 18%, and cold weather overflow facilities have been activated more frequently. Still, staffing shortages and inconsistent funding have limited their effectiveness. On peak nights, shelters still turn people away. Mental health coordination has improved through the deployment of mobile crisis response teams and expanded access to telehealth services. These teams now respond directly to encampments and public spaces, offering assessments and referrals. However, Wichita still lacks a dedicated mental health stabilization center, meaning many individuals in crisis are routed through emergency rooms or, worse, jail. Community engagement has grown through public forums, volunteer initiatives, and youth-led awareness campaigns. Local schools and churches have become more involved, and some neighborhoods have embraced outreach efforts. Yet, resistance remains in certain areas where residents oppose shelter development or outreach near their homes. Long-term view. Funding is still the weakest link. Federal ARPA funds have been exhausted, and state-level support remains inconsistent. Many nonprofits rely on short-term grants and private donations, making sustainability a constant challenge. Without a dedicated budget line for homelessness response, programs remain vulnerable to political shifts and economic downturns. One of the most promising developments is the Second Light campus, which began partial operations in late 2024. This centralized facility offers shelter, food, medical care, addiction recovery, and housing placement, all under one roof. It's designed to reduce fragmentation in services and provide a dignified, coordinated path out of homelessness. While still expanding, Second Light has already served hundreds of individuals and is considered a model for future intervention. City officials continue to consult with national experts, including teams from Houston and Bergen County, New Jersey, to replicate successful strategies. These collaborations have helped refine Wichita's approach, but implementation remains slow due to zoning disputes, staffing shortages, and bureaucratic delays. Councilmember Maggie Ballard, now in her second term, remains one of the most vocal advocates for urgent action. Her message is clear: we've built the blueprint. Now we need the courage to finish the job. In 2025, Wichita stands at a crossroads. The infrastructure for change exists, the community is more aware than ever, but without consistent funding, stronger political will, and faster execution, the crisis will continue to grow. This segment isn't just about what's been done, it's about what still needs to happen. Because in a city where people are still sleeping on sidewalks, good intentions aren't enough. What needs to change? Future Solutions, 2025. Wichita has spent years studying the crisis. The data is clear. The stories are heartbreaking. The blueprint for change exists. But the question remains, will the city act, or will it wait until the streets are beyond repair? To truly address homelessness, Wichita must shift from temporary fixes to transformational solutions. That begins with rethinking how we define access, dignity, and public responsibility. First, the city must invest in low-barrier shelters, facilities that welcome people without requiring sobriety, documentation, or proof of employment. These shelters don't ask for paperwork. They ask what you need. For many homeless individuals, traditional shelters are inaccessible due to addiction, mental illness, or lack of ID. Low-barrier models remove those obstacles and offer a safe place to sleep, eat, and begin recovery. In 2025, only a handful of such shelters exist in Wichita. That must change. Second, Wichita needs to launch mobile outreach teams that bring care directly to encampments. These teams, made up of social workers, nurses, and mental health professionals, don't wait for people to come to them. They go out into the streets, under bridges, behind buildings, and into parks. They offer medical checkups, addiction counseling, housing referrals, and emotional support. Cities like Houston and Seattle have seen success with this model. Wichita has the capacity, it just needs the commitment. Third, the city must invest in job training programs tailored for the homeless. These programs should be flexible, trauma-informed, and focused on real-world skills: construction, food service, caregiving, digital literacy. Many homeless individuals want to work, they just need a path that accounts for their circumstances. In 2025, Wichita's workforce development programs are still geared toward people with stable housing and transportation. That gap must be closed. Fourth, Wichita must create safe zones, designated areas where homeless individuals can access sanitation, food, and medical care without fear of arrest or harassment. These zones should include portable toilets, hand-washing stations, meal distribution, and mobile clinics. They should be staffed by trained professionals, not just volunteers. Safe zones aren't a permanent solution, but they're a humane response to an urgent need. Most importantly, Wichita must begin treating homelessness as a public health emergency, not a criminal issue. Ticketing people for sleeping in public doesn't solve anything. Arresting someone for loitering only deepens their trauma. Homelessness is a symptom of systemic failure. Housing, healthcare, employment, and mental health services breaking down. It requires coordinated care, not punishment. The city has already taken steps. The Second Light campus is a promising start. The Homelessness Task Force has laid out a solid framework. But as Councilmember Maggie Ballard said, "We've built the blueprint. Now we need the courage to finish the job." That courage must come from political will and community support. Leaders must prioritize funding, zoning, and staffing. Residents must reject stigma and embrace compassion. Nonprofits must be empowered, not overburdened, and the media must continue to shine a light on the realities behind the statistics. Because if Wichita doesn't act now, the crisis will deepen. More lives will be lost. More families will fall through the cracks. And the city's reputation for resilience will be replaced by silence. This segment isn't just a list of ideas. It's a call to action. The solutions exist, the need is urgent, and the time is now. If you believe every life matters, silence is not an option. Share this video, leave a comment, and demand that Wichita and America do better. Because behind every 10 AT is a story, and behind every story is a human being worth saving. This isn't just content, it's a call for compassion. Your voice matters, your action matters. So hit like, subscribe to Globe Path, and help us keep telling the stories that others overlook. Because change starts with awareness, and awareness starts with you,